Hi, my name is Josh from Bernal Cutlery, and you might remember me from such videos as let's sharpen this and hey, look at this old thing. Speaking of old things, today I want to talk to you about new old stock knives, and new vintage knives. They're kind of the same thing and kind of not. We've kind of simplified the terms that we use on our website to just new vintage, but I think there's a few things to mention here because this can encompass a lot of different types of knives. New vintage knives, pretty straightforward. It's an unused vintage knife. So as it was made and it got stored away, like this old 4-star Sabatier, this is most likely from the 30s. This one is way predating these new old stock 4-star Elephant Sabatier. So some marks are going to be different between the two. We can tell the age from the stamp pretty much. And then also there's the construction techniques too. So these definitely have some pretty different construction techniques from this old early 20th century cuisine massive or Nogent style to this stamped plastic handled carbon steel 70s 80s style knife. So you really couldn't mistake the difference between the two once even without the marks. But these arrive to us. We find them unused, pretty uncommon with old knives, so it's always great to find that. We can also find somewhat more recent, but still within that vintage time period, so more than a given number of years, like this Masakane 270 Gyuto. So this is from the 90s, so a lot more recent than the 1930s with this guy, but it's still pretty old. If you were born in the 90s, then you're maybe starting to feel a little bit of your age, and if you were running around in the 90s, then you're picking up some years right now. And so is this knife. Yours truly is in that category, unfortunately. But yeah, so still vintage, still old, it's unused. We haven't done anything to clean it. So new vintage. Does this mean if I've cleaned up something really well that it is now new vintage? No. So this slicer, it wasn't that used, but it had been sharpened a little bit. I cleaned it up a little bit extra, and it was used though. So my estimation, this is not new vintage. This is just really good condition for vintage. This Pinot slicer, this Italian slicer from the 50s or 60s, this one was unused, and it was blunt as it's the bluntest thing ever. I read the guy whose collection these came from, Ralph Gervasio. He said that these were shipped dull to avoid import taxes. By shipping something dull into the States, it didn't get taxed the same way. I'm not sure if that's true. It sounds good, but it is certainly true that they were just blunt as anything. So these really needed to be sharpened. So I opted to sharpen them. I still consider them new vintage. Now they're sharp and ready to use. So maybe we're pushing it on this a little bit, but they were unused. But I just didn't want to sell somebody a knife-shaped piece of steel because that's essentially how they arrived. So, sometimes new old stock will be things that aren't technically vintage. So they're not old enough to be vintage. So like we have these Yoshikanes here. These from roughly 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, something like that, back when they were making these Western handled ones. And the hammer marked SKD here is a little bit heavier than their current production or the more recent ones. I don't think these have been made all that recently, the hammer marked SKD that is. But these are old stock. They're definitely not made anymore. These will never be made, I don't think. The last time that I was in Japan and was meeting with Mr. Yamamoto at Yoshikane, I was starting to say in English, and it was going to be translated to him, do you think you're ever going to make the Western handle again? And he doesn't really speak English, but he knew right away what I was talking about, and he laughed and he says, I know what you're saying, and those are bad words. So old stock on these, because this is something that just won't be made again. If this was a knife that was still in production, is still made just like this, I guess it's old stock, but it's maybe not as exciting. Here's another old stock Japanese knife. This one, it's maybe technically vintage, like when it was produced, but not made anymore. So it's old stock. This definitely vintage. Definitely, you know, this is from the 50s. Like, things just are not made like this anymore. This Boucher with the hand forged carbon steel, and it's also unused. So this is definitely going to be easy to point at and say this is, you know, new vintage. But there's, like I said, lots of different kind of iterations of this. This is another new vintage one, 100% for sure. This Foster Brothers, you know, they've been out of business since the 50s. This slicer is unused. It's amazing. So yeah, thought I'd maybe hopefully clear up some terminology here. But yeah, the old stuff's fun. Love seeing how things, you know, were made anywhere, you know, from not that long ago to, you know, over 100 years ago. So that can be a really cool find to see something with its original grind, especially. But yeah, hope you enjoy this, and talk to y'all later.